Welcome back to Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. I'm Jenny Rudolph. This week, we're going to be getting onto the little bit steeper slopes of cognitive bystanding. In our very first episode of Curious Now, we talked about the process of mental noting, noticing when you were judging and just remarking on it lightly and letting it go. What we're going to be focusing on this week is the little bit more advanced practice of becoming skeptical or perhaps holding your views, thoughts, beliefs, causal explanations lightly and developing the ability to be curious about what you might be missing.
What if building leadership and connection skills in real life was less about grand epiphanies and more about small, consistent reps? The way athletes train, the way musicians practice, the way simulation refines teaming and clinical performance. Push ups, sit ups, building up your cardio. We put challenges and weights in front of ourselves to get fit. We embrace no pain, no gain. Yet when we find something difficult in real life, especially an interpersonal something, we often skitter away. We put down the weight and walk away from the workout. Curious Now helps us lean into those everyday interactions, the awkward silences, simmering tensions, and high stakes conversations, and treat them like reps in a leadership gym. Curious Now, stronger later.
I think of this as a foundational skill for the work that we will be doing over the next few weeks, which is interacting with other people in a skillful way that allows us to lead our teams, be a positive force in a duet that you might be in. And I mean a general life duet, whether it's your partner or a work colleague. Interacting with the other humans in a non-reactive way that allows you to truly hear them and connect with them requires a certain peacefulness around your own thought processes. And one of the ways that we get there is by being a little dubious, a little skeptical about the fact that we are right. So let me talk a little bit about the background here. We've explored earlier Lee Ross's idea of the fundamental attribution error, the pattern we have of we tend to explain our own behavior by the pressures we're under, the circumstances we're in, but other people's behavior by their character. And what Lee Ross found there was that we systematically leave out or underestimate the impact of circumstances, context, culture on other people. And so our explanations of their behavior are often flat wrong. More recently, Daniel Kahneman, who you may remember having won the Nobel Prize for his amazing work around thinking about thinking and his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, studied this along with others such that he came up with the idea that all of our thinking has noise in it, noise in the sense of static. Things that make us tend to overestimate certain things, underestimate others. His foundational work was around how we tend to avoid risk and seek gain, and we reframe things in ways that make us perceive things inaccurately in our goal of trying to avoid risk. So, great example of this, how noise can play out and people tend to ignore it, came from my former professor, Nelson Repenning, who teaches system dynamics at MIT. And he taught a very popular class there on Intro to System Dynamics. And students, after they got their grades back on their rather difficult problem sets, would sometimes come to Nelson and say, "Hey, wondering whether you would take a look at my problem set. I think you graded me down a little bit too much." And Nelson would say, "Okay, sure. But there's always a little bit of noise in grading. And so if I look at your problem set, it's also possible I may find that I graded you a little higher than I should have, in which case I will lower your grade." At which point, pretty much every student was like, "Yeah, thanks, but no thanks." But the idea that there could be noise in grading, that there's a little wiggle room, that we might be a little inaccurate, that our assumptions, our beliefs, our biases, our heuristics might drive us to make a slightly incorrect decision, is something that I think is quite unwelcome news to students, but is reality. So, what we're going to be thinking about today is developing the skill to say, "What could I be missing?" And we're going to be thinking about this in two ways. So, again, going back to the work of Danny Kahneman, also Pat Cross-Carey, who's an emergency medicine physician, and others who talk about system one and system two thinking. System one is that set of thought processes that are highly automatic. They can either be rather hot, such as amygdala driven, when a kid runs out in the middle of the road and you're driving and you slam on the brakes to not hit the kid before you know what you've done. That's system one. But equally, when you drive from work to home and you don't remember how you got there, that was also system one. It's routine. It's not necessarily hot, but you do it automatically without thinking, very little effort. So, one kind of bystanding that we sort of started working on in week one with noting your judgments was those more system one type judgments, those conclusions you drew about other people that might be fair or unfair. But what we're talking about this week is a larger discipline. And if you think about maybe mental noting as kind of the green slope on your ski mountain, what I'm talking about now is more perhaps like the blue slope. It's a little harder, which is you've slowed down, you're sorting something out, you've drawn a conclusion about what is the right way to refinance your house, for example, which is a complex set of calculations and values that you might have. How do you bystand that? So, how you bystand that is by starting to think that you might be missing something. There might be factors in the market, there might be factors with your partner, there might be factors in your local real estate environment, there might be the amount of work that it's going to take for you to refinance. And you might have missed something. And so, asking yourself, "Hey, this seems like a great idea, but what am I missing?" is what we're talking about here. This probably all seems like a very good idea and perhaps very obvious. But what's really interesting about it is it's actually kind of difficult. And it's more difficult for some of us than others of us. And here's why. As we develop as adults, our brain structure and how we relate to our own thoughts and beliefs changes. And what researchers like Jane Lovinger, Bob Keegan, and Bill Torbert have found is that for some of us, our thoughts are the truth. We are our thoughts. Bob Keegan talks about this as, are my thoughts the subject of the sentence? Like, "I think the sky is blue" is a sentence about reality rather than a sentence about my thoughts. What Bob Keegan has studied is as we get more mature as adults, many of us move on to recognizing that my thoughts are an object, not me. But that is not the case for all of us. So, for some of us, we tend to be very concrete thinkers. And when we care about something deeply, when a causal explanation we've come up with is close to our heart, close to our identity, close to our values, like this is the morally correct thing to do, it's harder for us to see our thoughts as an object. And so, this exercise is about strengthening our muscles to loosen our white knuckle grip on things that we care about deeply and be able to assess them a little bit objectively. I'd like to clarify that I'm in favor of having a mission. I'm in favor of purpose. I'm not saying we need to let go of that. But as we discussed in week one, we want to have our beliefs, we want to have our thoughts, don't want them to have us, and we want to create a little room around them. Let me pause there, James. Is there anything we're missing before I go to the workout of the week?
What a great and topical question. Yeah, we should add the note about as we're starting to talk about scaling good judgment to
Oh,
teams
yeah.
to
Yeah.
to driving cultures with conversation.
Yeah.
This "what am I missing" comment
Yeah.
is an incredible tool, not just for yourself, but as something to offer to the team as a leader.
Absolutely. Great, James. That's fantastic. So, we've been talking about developing the habit of asking oneself, what am I missing? As a valuable individual tool to make sure you don't get stuck going down the wrong path. Just to build on that a little bit more before I pivot, a classic example of that is when a doctor is taking care of a patient and comes up with a diagnosis of what is wrong with that patient. Maybe it looks like asthma, but you're an anesthesiologist and you notice that the patient on the operating table in front of you is having difficulty breathing, and you start treating the asthma, but it doesn't get better. At that point, it would be wise, and I found in my research that many doctors do ask themselves, what am I missing? And come up with alternate diagnoses. And that process in medicine is called building a differential diagnosis. So here we are trying to strengthen that first step internally for ourselves. But why it's particularly important as we move to thinking about how do we interact with teams? How do we strengthen our personal leadership in the team context? That inviting other people's perspectives by saying, hey, I think this is X, Y, or Z. What do you think? Or I'm thinking the best next path for our project is this direction. What am I missing? Starts creating a micro engine of a culture that is open to input and invites points of view that haven't been included. This is particularly important in complex tasks because, as Amy Edmondson's research has shown, inviting input from the periphery or from someone whose point of view is not as obvious as you think it might be, or you haven't even considered getting their perspective, often changes things. Also, when I, as the leader, model having strong commitment to my thoughts or the direction of action I want to take, but then being also flexible enough to say, hey, what am I missing? It enables other people in the team to feel okay about owning their perspectives and also inviting input. So, this is an incredibly important bridging activity for me internally and me to build a team culture externally. Let's talk about the workout of the week. When you have a thought like, this is the answer, this is how we should do it, this is how the world works, train yourself to say, what could I be missing? And just sit with that thought. So, the workout of the week is nothing more than a few times a day when you find yourself drawing a conclusion, having a strong point of view, or a causal explanation of something, ask yourself, what could I be missing? An example of this that was particularly funny for me is I was working 15 years ago with my wonderful colleague, Ignacio del Moral from Spain. And we had been working really hard together all day. And we'd finished a project and we were walking out of the office together. And I said, thank you so much, Nacho. That was fantastic. And he turned to me and he was like, don't thank me. You wouldn't thank this one, or you wouldn't thank that one, naming some of my other colleagues. And we kind of parted ways. And I was like, wow, I thought we had such a good day together. Like, what a jerk. Anyway, I went home and I thought to myself, I must be missing something here. And I followed up with Nacho the next day. And I was like, Nacho, I was so surprised when you were mad at me for thanking you. I just couldn't understand it. Can you help me understand what was going on there? And he was like, yes, of course I can. You don't thank peers for working with you. You only thank people who you think are below you or who are reporting to you. And so I took it as an insult. And I was like, oh. And I said, really? And he was like, yeah, in Spain, you would never thank a peer for doing something. So I am not 100% sure I remember this story completely accurately. So I'm sure, Nacho, you'll correct me if I've gotten it wrong. But I would never in 1,000 years have considered that there was this cultural difference that I was missing. And so this was a very rewarding lesson that taught me it's really important to ask, what am I missing?
Sit with that thought. Oh, Jenny, I had the thought that there may be a specific type of psychology where this is terrible advice, which is people whose major problem is self-doubt.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I don't know if you just want to put in a comment to address that. Like, if you're someone who has like deep struggles with certainty, if anything,
Yeah.
the what am I missing is more likely to be that you actually are an expert and know what you're talking about. You're missing that part of it.
Well, one thing I could say, tell me if this is too technical, but the project that I did for my doctoral dissertation, we found some people got fixated. They were absolutely certain they knew what it was and they kept treating it and they were on the wrong track. Some people had the opposite problem, which is they kept asking themselves, what am I missing? What am I missing? And they would jump from diagnosis to diagnosis and start to explore the other diagnosis, but not really follow up on it enough, not believe in themselves enough to push it all the way through. And so never really solve the problem versus the people who I ended up calling adaptive problem solvers who started down a path. If it didn't work, asked themselves, what am I missing? And then tried another diagnosis and the treatments that went along with it, but would then stick with it and didn't knock themselves off the path. So I think the thing for us to potentially keep in mind is that for some of us, we're already too flexible, we're already too open to input, we're already trying so hard to take feedback that we may not stick to a course of action that we should. So for most of us, or for many of us, being humble enough to ask what I'm missing is a great idea. But for some of us, maybe a little less of that would be valuable. That's a little tangent in the context of this particular episode, but I just thought it would be empathic to recognize that all of us might sometimes fall into that other bucket of being too open.